Cinema St. Louis's The Lens is now the takeup.com, a place to gather after the film is over. I'm your host, Joshua Ray, and fear not, all your favorite episodes of The Lens featuring all your favorite guests are still here in your feed, just a little refocused. Stay subscribed to us here for future episodes, and you can follow along for new ones and more at the Takeup STL. Thank you for joining us on The Lens, a Cinema St. Louis podcast. I'm your host, Joshua Ray, and while we're on a bit of a summer vacation, occasionally we're going to come on and do some now showing. We're going to be back to The Lens proper in September with our next miniseries about the films of Nora Ephron and Nancy Meyers. But until then, we're happy to present the Golden Anniversaries Film Festival talks with some key speakers talking about some of the great films of 1972. And you can go to cinemastlouis.org to see information about upcoming events, including upcoming Golden Anniversary talks you can see in person or online. So I've seen it twice. I saw it at the screening we went to, and then I saw it at the IMAX in Chesterfield, the Limax, to be honest, right? I have a friend who's in San Francisco right now. Shout out Julian, I know he listens. And he went to what is advertised as the second largest IMAX screen in the country. Something like 96 feet wide, and saw Nope for the second time there. It does make a difference.
There's only portions, right? They're kind of doing the Christopher Nolan thing where there's like segments of it that are full IMAX.
Yes. And I think it's, Nolan uses it to great effect. And he's done, I remember when we all first got like the DVD of The Dark Knight, we were like, why is the aspect ratio changing? You remember all that crap. But this is sort of subtextual too when it opens up, because this whole film is about spectacle and the limits of vision, the limits of the frame, and how you can manipulate image, or at least maybe how image manipulates you. But we shouldn't get like really grand scale. Maybe we should get into some details, but then we're going to drop a spoiler flag. And then we can go full spoilers and talk about the one thing no one can figure out and what we think it is. And but first, like, you published your review on last week, and you had a pretty positive take of it. Has it grown or not in your estimation as you think about it? Have you thought about it at all?
Yeah, I mean, I think that's true of all Peele's films. But I feel like this is going to be in the same place as Us. They give me 6 months or 12 months, and I might even raise it like a half a letter grade or something.
Yeah.
I gave it a solid B because I do think it's not a perfect film. But I kind of did the same thing with Us. And I gave Us a solid B, I think, and it's grown in my estimation. It's a fun film to talk and think about, which I think is always a great sign of, like, cinematic longevity, when you come out of it excited to talk to other people about it, not just in the sort of superficial, oh, here's all the Easter eggs I spotted kind of way, but in the what the heck is this doing and why and what's going on. I think that is always a good sign. So whatever my criticisms of it, however light they are, I do think that, like, it has been a fun film to think about and to see. I've been following like the general critical reaction pretty closely.
And
a lot of
lovely YouTubers' reactions.
No, I don't do the YouTubers.
Don't say his name. Don't say his name.
Let's not even talk about that.
Okay.
But yeah, like it's been a lot of people I like to read have been writing very intelligently and incisively about it in the last, few days. So I think that's always a great sign when a film brings that to the table, particularly like a mainstream film. Like, this is a piece of mainstream pop entertainment, and it's really gotten people to write about it the way they would normally write about Memoria or whatever, so that's kind of
right. And that's one of the things that thrills me the most in cinema, is when a big budget project is able to unfold delicately, like something like Memoria or any other art house fare. This film is packed with ideas.
I just said Memoria randomly. I just said Memoria randomly, but it occurs to me it's actually a pretty good comparison.
It's a good double bill, sight and sound, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. When we watched it, I was enraptured, enamored, confused. We'll get into it. What I was really confused about is not necessarily any plot elements. It's pretty straightforward with plot, but there are symbols throughout. There's a subtext throughout that is so rich and so meaty, and often is what's the word I want? Is often holding two very different ideas at the same time together. And that is so thrilling to me. And that you were talking about your reaction to Us. I had the same reaction to Us, and like I can't parse through this. Us is interesting because spoiler alert, it has a twist to it that creates a sort of tethered double in another vision of what the film is with that knowledge. And it really enriches it. Nope.
But even apart from that, I think Us works. Like even that's the remarkable thing about I think the slightly surreal, strongly allegorical story that it's telling. That like the final twist does obviously enrich it and makes you want to revisit it again. But I think it works. It feels good at making things feel strange. And I know that seems like a very simplistic thing to say, but it's hard.
It's hard to get.
Yeah, it's hard to get weird right.
Right.
And there are different
because it often comes across as like either cloying or very try hard. And with him, he's able to pick up these cultural signposts and just tweak them. But it's really the uncanny. So you're putting like the flailing arm inflatable tube man in like in rows in a Western valley, right? So
almost like landing lights for I thought of like landing lights for
right.
So the gulch itself becomes a runway.
Right. It's the organization of all of these very familiar signposts that is so unique to him. The way he's able to eke out this kind of unparalleled strangeness from them. I'm not the biggest fan of Get Out. I think it's kind of overrated, and people can come at me for that. I think a lot of it tends towards like one of those, like a very good version of one of those parody movies from SNL. But it's mind, appropriately so, I guess, is so sharp. But I really felt like Us was such a step forward in his filmmaking and in really creating that tension between the canny and the uncanny and the organization.
Well, I think that Get Out, to me, the thing that still impresses me is that the screenplay, and he won the Oscar famously, and that I revisited, I think for the third time right after he won the Oscar, and was like, yep, this absolutely deserved to win because this is an ironclad script. It feels like something he spent 10 years polishing. But there's a messiness, I think, that one of my criticisms of Us and Nope, I guess it's a criticism, but it's also like a positive in some way, is that they're much messier films with a lot going on, not plot-wise. I think I want to circle back to something you mentioned earlier. I kind of cut you off, which is that Nope actually has a really simple plot. And I think one part that sort of sets it apart from the other two is how much the final act in particular stops feeling like a survive this situation scenario, which Get Out and Us definitely were right up to their very ends. We need to get out of this situation, pun intended. We need to survive this situation. Whereas in the third act, Nope kind of does this transformation into a more, I want to use the word positive because positive.
It's like a team mission movie.
A more assertive, more proactive story. And again, I think the parallel to Jaws is right. Not because this is a monster, not because it's doing anything similar stylistically or scare wise, but because of that structural twist where the third act becomes, we are not going to sit still and wait for X to happen. We're going to go out and make something happen for ourselves, which is a nice note to end on. I note in particular, like it's nice to see that from Peele because previous two films were definitely about the Black experience to some degree, but they weren't. Definitely Get Out, some to some lesser degree Us, but they weren't exactly huge showcases for like Black joy and Black excellence.
Sure.
And
No, I understand what you mean. Yeah.
and I feel like the third act of Nope in particular gets that right. Like the solidarity of the siblings, the things that are happening, the way that there's some wonderful payoffs where skills that we've heard about tangentially start cropping up in like characters who have abilities and skills that we've only heard about loosely start coming up in that final act.
A reclamation of the medium they're using to complete their task.
The word I was looking for earlier and I couldn't quite put my finger on is Fortean, after Charles Fort. Charles Fort, the famous paranormal investigator and writer. There's this feeling of weird with a capital W that has a Fortean quality to it. And for example, rains of man-made objects from the sky, which play a critical role in the fate of OJ and Emerald's father, like that's a classic example of a Fortean phenomenon, which different people might put different interpretations about why that occurred. But Ford was always more interested in the who, what, where, when. He was interested in it almost from a journalistic standpoint of he wanted to document the existence of weird things that happened that seemed inexplicable, not because he was necessarily interested in explaining them, but because he was interested in them as a phenomena that tends to be forgotten. And to me, that's a mission statement from Peele, because I can't believe he's not familiar with that. He by proxy through John Keel became a heavy part of the Mothman sightings or incidents. So like, I feel like Peele is aware of that, and specifically having strange objects coming out of the sky, raining down, feels like almost like a mission statement in that first being, like, this is the kind of weird capital W that we're in for.
Yeah, it's sort of the horror version of the Rain of Frogs and Magnolia. Magnolia's entire thesis, which is, these things really do happen.
Sometimes shoes stand up for no reason whatsoever.
Hey, wait, we'll get to the shoe. The thing I love about this, and people tend to talk about these three films, and the latter two especially, in not understanding the character's motivation. The one thing I love about these films is that the motivation doesn't need to be explicitly spelled out. I completely understand why they would need to do this, not only for financial reasons. They've inherited this historic part of the Hollywood dream factory, which is Black owned, and it's falling apart. It's crumbling apart. And not only is it financial, it's their family story. And having recently lost their father, of course, they're going to do anything they can to continue his legacy and also survive. How are people watching films and not picking up on this?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like Emerald fits it pretty clearly why she wants to do it. And the thing is, like, the personalities, the yin and yang personalities of OJ and Emerald are so beautifully drawn, both by the screenplay and by the performances. And you get like the sense of how their immediate responses to seeing this object in the sky that they can't quite pin down are slightly different. OJ is maybe a little more spooked by it, since he was the one who actually had the first sighting of it out on the ranch.
Sure.
But Emerald's sort of eyes light up, and she starts her brain starts going, and she's like, how could we make something out of this? And what's interesting is that a different kind of film would turn that fundamental different reactions into the core dramatic intra-sibling conflict of the film. And instead, OJ is wary, OJ is more sensible, OJ is more pragmatic, but he still goes along. He still goes with Emerald to Fry's and gets the equipment and consents to have it all installed.
She also instantly believes him. She does not doubt that this man would lie to her on any level. And so, which is why
the OJ, being the one who sees it is important. And again, the brilliance of the script is that if Emerald had been the one to see it, there would have been 20 minutes of dithering as her sort of exuberant personality oversells it and OJ doubts it. But Peele makes the more introverted hard-nosed guy the first one to see it, which instantly negates that the need for that kind of like plot dithering and sets us right into motion of cracking the scheme of what they're going to take a picture or a video of this thing.
And this, for me, is one reason why his filmmaking is so special. And we don't see it particularly in Hollywood filmmaking, turning away from easy explanation, turning away from exposition that tells the audience. To me, this is his most elegant film yet. I don't see a messiness to it at all. I think there's a spareness in the filmmaking, in the language of Nope. There's a spareness that is inherited from its Western setting. And culturally, to me, it's so beautiful to see a film exclusively about filmmaking, but about filmmaking where Black people and those who are othered are centralized in the filmmaking narrative. And for it to be a joyous celebration of filmmaking that is hyper aware of the dangers of the moving image. I think
Right.
at this point, for me, it's my favorite film of the year.
Hmm.
I think it's kind of a masterpiece. I find it to be emotionally enriching. I find it to be, I love culling of the influences and culling of the ideas from disparate places, seemingly disparate places, to make a thesis about screens and how we interact with screens and the moving image that I find incredibly thrilling at pretty much every given turn. I have two very minor, there are like two small beats in this that I'm like, eh. Otherwise, I actually think it's probably his best film, but I'm also like, Us is kind of no notes from me. And Us took me a much longer time to get to no notes, whereas this one took me about a day. And the feeling that I got from racking my brain of trying to connect Gordy's home to what's in the sky, to a praying mantis on a camera, to a shoe standing on end, has been one of the more thrilling experiences in cinema in the past couple of years for me. And I think we should probably get into very specific details.
We're
I
going
wouldn't
full
say,
spoiler now, right?
yeah, let's go into the spoiler. You probably want to skip this if you haven't seen it because it's not that anything that happens in it is so surprising. It's that the way it unfolds to me is so predicated on what you expect from something like this. All right, let's throw the flag down. We go in spoilery.
No, no, no. Mm-mm.
Nah. No. Nope. No. No. Nope.
Where do we want to go first? What do we want to do first? The
Well,
shoot. Let's talk about the shoot.
We're gonna talk about the shoot.
So during the flashback to the attack, we see, so the flashback actually happens twice. It is the cold open to the film, the preamble to the preamble, right?
You get a slice of it. You don't get much of it.
Yeah.
You just
So
get Gordy.
what you see is a very low on the ground. Camera is low to the ground, and we are watching this chimpanzee bloodied, just kind of wander about a set. And we do see a shoe standing on end with a single drop of blood on it, next to a body that appears to be pretty beaten up. And then we have the scene with Keith David where everything writtens from the sky. And then later on, we get the full flashback and balloons are raising up to the ceiling, going to the heat lights. And as they do, they pop and it seems to set off the chimpanzee. And as it turns out, the perspective that we've already seen and didn't have the information we now have the information that it's actually Stephen Young's character. His nickname is Jupe, and the theme park he owns is called Jupiter's Claim. It's a Western theme park. We are situated in his experience as he hides under a table, and the chimpanzee approaches him and gives him a fist bump. A lot of this film is also about exploitation, and it gets there specifically through animal exploitation
Yeah.
in filmmaking.
I have thoughts on that as the resident vegetarian.
Yeah, I bet. But so we still see that shoe there, and we see within his shrine to the whole Gordy's home fiasco, Stephen Young has that shoe. And not only does he have that shoe, it's within a shrine that he's bragging about selling the experience of to people. People are contacting him because they've heard about it on the internet and they want to see this secret space where he's got this shrine to this very traumatic event. So traumatic, he can't actually tell the story. He tells the story by telling the SNL skit version of it. Chris Kattan, man.
Which I think is it's not only a great like thematic beat, but it's just, there's something very well observed about that. The idea of like, it's kind of excruciating when somebody tries to explain a comedy sketch to you.
It's so bad, right? It's like me trying to explain the scene, right?
It's never a satisfying experience, and it somehow works with the way that Jupe has this sort of nervous. He's amused by it, but he's also clearly like uncomfortable in some way talking about it. It jibes with that whole thing. Yeah. What of the shoe? What are we to make of the shoe?
The shoe means nothing and everything, right? Like, what do you want the shoe to mean? I think there are a lot of things in this film that have corollaries to some sort of theory or logic, right? But the shoe is so representative of our urge to interpret the image. We must discern meaning from the image. Me leaving this theater, he had already indicted me throughout this film, and I wanted everything to make sense. I wanted everything to coalesce together. And
except the mystery, as the Coens would say.
Right, exactly. And that's the thing. It's like, what does that shoe mean? Well, the shoe means nothing, and the shoe means everything.
Well, I mean, the fact that it's in a display case positioned exactly as it was presumably found or photographed on the set after the disaster with Gordy. I mean, like there's an element of fetishism, right? We could part of, and I think maybe there's like some commentary on fandom in general, like the way that fandom latches onto details that may not have the meaning that any meaning that the creators intended. It may be an incidental detail put in for stylistic reasons, or it may be something completely random. And then there's a tendency to latch onto those details and to fetishize them.
And I've mentioned it meaning. Yeah.
And I've mentioned it 1,000 times, because but it is kind of my Rosetta Stone for understanding films about mystery and ambiguity. I always go back to what Bill Cooper said in Twin Peaks, which is that he had this rock solid belief that if you can crack the code, you can solve the crime, that all puzzles can be unlocked if you're just diligent. And of course, what Twin Peaks did was it spent 2 seasons completely dismantling that argument, that there is madness and chaos in the universe that cannot be understood. So yeah, like the way that object becomes fetishized, and that like, I mean, the actress's blood is still on it, and Jupe has it in his, like, the place he works every day. That's
an actress that he appears to still have a some sort of relationship with, because she's eventually invited to his big debut show, which
I feel so bad for that woman. Like, what a life she's had. She had this horrible forfeited thing happen to her, and then how did she die?
So the worst bit of it is when he takes you inside. When he takes you inside the machine, and it is, I mean, the whole thing is sort of a metaphor for camera or creation, and you can take it in any direction you want. It looks kind of vaginal, it looks like a flower. It also looks like a sea creature. This is the quote unquote UFO that you've all seen in the trailers, is actually some sort of maybe
Life form.
alien life form, maybe it's not alien.
They kind of do
Indian-
the tremors thing. It's not important where it came from. It's just here.
Right. Yeah, who cares? But what's important is that in the center of it is this. Wait, okay, let me get back to my point. I'm so excited about this fucking movie.
We're going to talk about how its mouth is a screen.
Its mouth is a flickering. And maybe that's a little like the relationship between Muybridge, which is an important plot point, is that the Haywoods' great grandfather was the jockey and the trainer of the horse in Edward Muybridge's film of, well, it was a series of still images that put together made one of the first moving pictures. That is not real. That is a fabrication of Jordan Peele's, but I think it gets to his point about reclamation of your history.
Well, what is true is that the film that they show is one of Muybridge's sequences.
Oh,
it
for
wasn't
sure.
necessarily the first, but it was one of his famous sequences. But the really salient point that I don't think they mention in the film, which is that we know the horse's name, but we don't know the name of the black guy who wrote it. Like how
Exactly.
on the nose is that?
I mean, there's a lot of discussion in this, not discussion of it, but it's around the fringes of it, is like the erasure of the Black experience throughout history. It's how you choose to edit your images, right? Is how you choose to tell the story. But the thing we were first talking about was the credits unfold as it turns out to be inside of the animal. But instead of its kind of pillowy, like flashing inside screen that it has, as it might be a digestive system, we see the Muybridge short, and then we go into the film proper. But when the thing unfolds in the end, it is like, how would you describe it? It's like a silky fabric that keeps eating itself. It flickers. It appears to like eat itself and then digest itself outward.
To me, it was like watching like a protein enzyme unfold on like a colossal scale.
Right. But then it's like
Peele has talked about Neon Genesis Evangeline being an influence visually on the design. And you probably can talk more about that than I can, but I know that that creature design didn't come sort of ex nihilo. It has some influences, but it is very original. It is one of the most original alien designs I've seen in a long time.
Yeah, and I know that it has some roots in like actual sea biology right now. Biology too.
So just jumping in with my bio background, for those who don't know, I have a biology degree.
The scientist.
There's the class of creatures that includes jellyfish, the cnidarians, and also some lower forms, hydrozoans, and so forth. Like the distinguishing feature of early life forms, of early animal life forms, is the emergence of an orifice, right? And that's an important part of the plot of this film. But what distinguishes those more ancestral life forms from later life forms is that the gut, the digestive system, eventually was turned into two. And now you have a mouth, for lack of a better term, a mouth and an anus. It became a vector. What in those earlier life forms, the mouth and the anus are the same thing. One hole sucks up and one hole spits out. And again, I can't believe that's an accident.
Andrew, you just this film, because that thing is a metaphor for film, for cinema. It is the thing that consumes but also gives. It is
all right. It sprays out blood everywhere.
Oh my god. I hadn't seen that shot. I guess it is in the trailer of the blood coming down on the front steps.
Yeah.
I hadn't seen that. My jaw was on the floor. I was like, I can't believe he's raining blood on this house right now. And not in a like Evil Dead remake where it's raining pools of blood. It is like icky.
That's literally the blood of the children that we just saw in the earlier scene.
And because you have that association with it. It is like, oh my god, that is fucking devastating. But that's also in the middle of where you're seeing God. So there's a shot where Daniel Kaluuya, that when the alien comes, electricity stops. It's also kind of about, digital versus analog, and the thing that really saves the whole gambit until hubris comes along is that a non-electronic camera is used to capture the image that they're trying to make bank off of using
film. What is film?
Right. So,
and there's a meta there too, right? Because Nope is Peele's first non-digital film.
Yeah, and there's so many threads, and that it is a film, especially about Hollywood history, and about, we're pairing this with Buck and the Preacher, the Golden Anniversaries talk. That was Sidney Poitier's directorial debut, and that is a reclamationist Western that centers on two Black protagonists in the West.
When I saw that poster in the film, I wanted to do the Leo pointing thing. It was like,
yeah, right. Yeah.
I see you, Peele. I know what you're doing.
Yeah. And
there's a racial element to it, but there's also just a like labor element to it. And that of course takes us back to us. Mm-hmm. But the idea that, the people, I don't think it's an accident, for example, that, OJ is wearing a crew hoodie from the Scorpion King. Like, in a sense, this isn't just a tribute to the forgotten Black contributions. It's a tribute to everybody who's below the line. It's a tribute to all the working stiffs, down to including horse trainers, who don't necessarily get to share. I mean, which is itself kind of fascinating, because Peele is sort of one of our emergent American, not emergent anymore, I say he's arrived, American auteurs. But of course, this film is partly like a breakdown of auteur theory. It's about the collaborationist aspects of filmmaking.
Going back to the digital and the analog, I love this shot or scene where they've just gotten fired off that commercial job because the horse had a bad reaction to seeing something, which is key to the plot. It reminds
a digital VFX ball.
Yes, a digital VFX ball frightens him, which is a mirror. So it was a screen itself. They get fired because it has a bad reaction to it. But then there's a scene after where you see a green screen horse made of like iron being walked in. So they're just going to CGI it in. Yeah. So it's kind of a great metaphor for what's happening on a larger scale within the film and in the industry. Yeah. There's a Rossellini film called The Machine That Eats Bad People. And it's about a magical camera that destroys fascists, if you want to take it at a kind of metaphorical level. And that's what I kept thinking about, is like, this is the machine that just kills people as film, as a metaphor, the consumer behind it, but then also the art form. And how do you marry these two things? That's always the question people are always talking about with this. When the film finally takes a shape of kind of the fist pumping, rallying around a mission, and all of the kind of pieces that these people have set up begin to play out and begin their plan is kind of going according to plan, I lose the thread of everything else in it. And I think that's with a purpose. It sort of becomes the thing that it's also critical about. And to me, that it can carry both of those things and have everything be true is very thrilling to me. The tension between that is unparalleled.
Yeah, and I've seen some of the negative reactions to the film I've seen have sort of harped on that aspect, that there's an element of inconsistency or even hypocrisy on Peele's part. But I think, like, ambiguity is okay. It's okay for a film to think of two ideas at the same time, to have two things in competition and tension on screen for us to witness and allow us to sort out our feelings about it. I don't think that's necessarily wrong. One of the things I do like about the film a lot is that, unlike, we've talked a lot about metaphors here. We said metaphor about 100 times, I feel like, over 30 minutes. But one of the reasons I think it's a strong film and maybe stands up a little stronger as a story than compared to Us is that you can ignore the metaphors completely and it works as a crackerjack thriller, particularly in that last act. I think it sweeps you along. Like, I wasn't necessarily intellectualizing any of this when I was watching it for the first time. I was just enjoying it for what it was, for this sort of a filmmaker with a proven track record getting to work on a much larger pop art scale than he ever had before. And it works on that level. Whereas us, I feel like the allegory is so quasi
Strong and
surreal.
central.
Yeah, it's almost quasi surreal. It's completely implausible, and if you just have to be okay with that, with the whole thing about the tethered doesn't even really make sense. But you just have to say, yes, I agree to this unrealistic scenario.
I will suspend my disbelief.
Yes. And not that Giant Aliens needs any less suspension of disbelief, but there isn't that whiff of like overt allegory to the scenario.
No.
Like all of us recognize the genre essentialism of there's a UFO in the sky. What's going on? Is it really, like, what should we do? Like, that scenario at the most distilled down level is recognizable. Whereas I don't think you could, other than where people are trying to kill us and we're trying to get away, I'm not sure how you distill down us. The complexity of the scenario is sort of the point of us.
Yeah. You could describe Nope in 30 seconds or less, right? Even though I took quite a bit longer to do it. Us, Us is like a podcast episode. But so Nope, I think you're right. And that's why I was vibing with it so hard and just luxuriating in it. And it is a film that another criticism people have had is that it seems stretched to a point. I'm like, y'all went and saw that Quentin Tarantino 3-hour Hollywood thing and enjoyed watching Rick Dalton talk for 10 minutes. Like, you can't watch these people talk and be funnier. Anyway.
No, I mean, if I have a criticism, it's that I feel like, as with Us, there's a lot of ideas stuffed in here, and some of them sort of get short shrift. I could watch a 3-hour cut of this film, I feel like.
I think I could too, but then I think it doesn't become the very neat thing that it's also about, right? I think its elegance to me is in its construction, but the elegance isn't necessarily in its ideas, and that is thrilling. Everything we're talking about, I've been thinking about since, when did we see it? What, 7 days ago?
Yeah,
7 days ago, right?
Yeah.
I've been thinking about it constantly, and talking to some people about it and reading things about it. Richard Brody wrote a beautiful review, called it one of the best films about filmmaking ever. And Richard Brody is someone who I think he had Us and Get Out as his number one films of their respective years. So I was anticipating his writing, and because I was also so thrilled at the things he was thrilled at in Us, that I was sort of, he's gonna really be able to spell out the things I cannot, and he did not disappoint. There is one.
Alyssa Wilkinson has a really great piece of Vox too. That's been my favorite piece of writing I've counted so far.
Yeah, it's absolutely incredible, and it's sort of a misnomer in that it's Jordan Peele's Nope explained. It's a beautiful piece of film criticism. Yeah. And she does sort of break down all the
all Vox pieces have to be saying explained.
Yeah, I guess they do. Film criticism explained. I want to talk about just this one cut in it. The whole film is about your limitations in vision. And this is one of my very favorite preoccupations with horror filmmakers, especially, well, if you want to consider Brian De Palma a horror filmmaker, thriller filmmaker.
Some films, yeah.
Yeah, Hitchcock and Argento are sort of three granddaddies of vision and extremis, we'll call it. And this film is also about the limits of the frame, the limits of your eyesight, right? And being able to get at truth, whether or not you can believe what's in front of your eyes or see beyond the frame. There's one sequence where all the electricity has gone out of the house, because anytime it passes by, it sucks out stops all the electricity, even in your cell phone. I love that bit from Brandon Perea in the Fries. He's like, cell phones don't work like that. He's my new crush. Anyway, OJ is rescuing a horse he sold to Stephen Young after Stephen Young is devoured and shown in the guts of this thing, which looked like a jumping house that has like collapsed and murdered children.
It has a
And we're-
translucency to that reminded me of a pitcher plant, like the interior of a carnivorous plant.
It's so gross, and it's so upsetting because he sits you like on their faces as they're squeezed through this thing.
Yeah.
Anyway, he's rescued Lucky. He escaped the animal, alien, whatever, and he's sitting in his truck as it's raining down blood. And he looks at the house, and the house just has this circle with layers. It's like the 2 layers of hell is raining down because this thing has opened its butthole up and is just shitting blood everywhere. And keys and coins and the same stuff that's all of the things it can't digest, right? Which is kind of the way they end up killing it. Anyway, he's in his truck. He sees that the thing moves away from the house. He sits back and he's waiting, and then he leans forward, and this is so smart to keep it inside the truck, keep it inside the house, save for a choice movement down the house as you see the blood raining down, because of course I wanted to see that, had to. But he just leans forward to look at the sky, and then you get a point of view shot, and he can't see anything. The thing's moved. You can tell it's moved by he can't see anything because his vision's obstructed. What you then see is he moves back, and then he goes to open the truck door. And what I have been trained, my Hitchcock training tells me, okay, now I get his point of view. I get to see the thing that he's looking at. Instead, Jordan Peele puts his camera very low to the ground. And
almost like a worm's eye view. Yeah.
Worm's eye view, very low to the ground. And Kaluuya opens the door very slowly and then pans up to see him looking, and then seeing the rings of raining hellfire in the sky.
And the mouth anus yawning up in the sky. Yeah.
Quick cut back inside, slam the door shut, and he says, nope. And just the resistance of giving you what you want mixed with, I really can't show it to you that way because I'm trying to reveal something else, something more true to you is present throughout this film at virtually every turn. I did mention 2 things I didn't kind of vibe with. They're both related to the cinematographer, which is such a great character.
Michael Wincott, man.
This character.
Just hearing his voice come back on the big screen is great.
And him singing One-Eyed, One-Horned, Flying Purple People Eater. I guess to the first thing that we're talking about, something that's sort of innocuous is turned on its head and made into something very nefarious, right? If anything, to me, that it spells out the metaphor a little bit too much, maybe. And then the other thing would be the TMZ guy. Once he's hits the invisible wall, we'll call it, of electricity, and his bike throws him and he's on the ground, and OJ goes to save him because that's the type of person he is. And the guy's like, did you get my camera? Did you get my camera? I'm like, all right, let him say it once, twice for the stupid folks.
Yeah, I think if there's one theme, I feel like it either needed to be dropped or needed to be developed better. It's just the generic. There's a we need to stop looking at things through our phones and just appreciate them in the moment, kind of like scoldish element that winds its way subtextually through the film. I didn't really appreciate that, just because I feel like it feels so easy and cheap. You either need to develop it more in a more sophisticated way, or you just need to not include it. And that TMZ guy felt like sort of the epitome of that.
Yeah, the TMZ guy does point to that. I think it's more about the quest to capture, right?
Yeah.
But that's how they win too. And that's what I'm talking about, having all these ideas that seem to conflict in having a holistic vision of the capability of film.
But it's interesting, where the film ends, right? Because we know on some level that the capturing of the image is victory. It could lead to, it presumably will lead to fame and fortune for the Hammonds. But Peele ends the movie on the fact of the photo. She got it. That's all that matters. Emerald got it. And OJ is alive. So we get the things that matter to these characters. They achieve the singular thing they set out to do, and their sibling pair is still intact. That's all that matters, and that's where the film can end. We don't need that freaking epilogue where we get to see them on, talking about it as you or whatever. Yeah. Like, it doesn't matter.
Well, the one thing that I like about the well camera, and this is a crank camera that you activate with a coin. Mm-hmm. Importantly so, I think, because it goes back to the way their father died, right?
Yeah.
And then a crank camera that once you've fully cranked it, it will take one exposed image. But what she's essentially doing is remaking the Muybridge film through still images and animating them as they come out, Polaroid style, to make the story of Nope about how they won.
And what's interesting about that, if you know the history of the Muybridge sequences, is that part of the reason he created them, and he was just as much interested in anatomy and physiology as he was in photography. And one of the reasons he's created them, because one of the questions that scientists in the 19th century had about animal locomotion was, are there moments when a horse is 100% off the ground when it's at full gallop?
Right. And
in order to find that moment, he had to proceed through a series of sequences. This one, nope, that's not it yet. This one, nope, that's not it yet. Which again, sort of, it goes right back to the sequence that we get at the end with Emerald, which is that, no, not quite, no, not quite, no, not quite. There it is, the Oprah
full
shot.
flight, right? Yeah.
The Oprah shot.
Yeah.
There's something interesting going on too. I come back to biology about how the things that the monster cannot digest are metal and plastic, the two man-made things.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And what makes the spectacle go away, kills it. Another spectacle, a big kitschy giant cowboy balloon.
I love it. A representation of a human that's winking.
Right.
But everything.
Spectacle replaces spectacle, I guess is what I'm saying.
Right.
Spectacle devours spectacle and is devoured in turn.
I think ultimately it's about that. It's about, resisting it, but the pull towards it, and how this invention that we, at least some of our life we have dedicated to realizing its capabilities. There's great essays. Krakauer wrote about this, and just warning about its ability to tell truth and its ability to lie. And here we have that's something that I think is getting towards truth by lying great big lies at us. I think it was what did Godard say? Film is truth 24 frames per second. Godard or Truffaut, one of those two, and then Brian De Palma said, it lies 24 frames per second.
But that's okay. I mean, I think I don't really agree with the criticisms about like the ambiguity or the hypocrisy being a bug. I think it's a feature. And I think part of what Peele's doing, and it is part of a larger tradition that you don't often see in pop cinema, it's generally a feature of more cerebral cinema, is that it's okay to feel ambivalent sometimes about imagery. It's okay to be of two minds, and now that I'm saying it out loud, it gets at like our distinction, our artificial distinction between populist cinema and art cinema, which like you feel bad about liking pop cinema when you should like art cinema, for the same reason that you feel bad about gawking at some spectacle that is harmful in some way. Like, it's okay. I feel like part of what Nope is doing is giving us permission to feel. It's not scolding us. It's giving us permission to feel ambivalent about it.
To understand all of it, to take it all in, right? And
expand our frame, if you will.
Expand the
to
frame,
capture more.
As they do in IMAX. I told you it had purpose. The one thing I noticed this second round, I guess you would call it littered with Easter eggs. They're just details that sort of prop up his ideas. Within Stephen Young's shrine, there's a T-shirt for Cape Canaveral celebrating the Challenger launch in 1986.
Every Gen Xer can tell you where they were.
Exactly. And I love Keke Palmer's outfits, Emerald's outfits. She's always wearing an animal.
I want to go back briefly, and we've gone on for way longer than we intended, but that's okay.
What?
This film deserves it. I want to go back. You mentioned cuts, and one of the more remarkable things about this film to me, just from a sort of looking at Peele's career, is that he's using the same editor, Nicholas Mansour, that he's used on both previous films. But I feel like one of my criticisms of Us was that I felt like the editing was a bit dodgy at times. Like it was confusing and not in a deliberate way about time and where exactly we were. I think this film has some absolutely gobsmacking cuts in it. I mean, you mentioned the one earlier. The one that sticks out in my mind is we get this beautiful scene before sort of the big rodeo show set piece that ends up killing everybody, where Stephen Young's character Jupe is sort of going through his preparations before the show. And we get the impression by the end of the film, we have enough backstory to realize he's been doing this like every week for 6 months, and that's where all the horses have been going, to our horror. So he's like, I don't know what the word is. He's psyching himself up to deliver.
He's rehearsing. He's been rehearsing.
Right. But what we don't get is the rehearsal. It's this beautiful long shot of him staring sort of melancholically. There's something going on in his eyes. His wife is going around doing busy work. And then she like gives him his hat or his neck. He gives him his hat, I think. Now he's truly the Western character. Mm-hmm. And then he says like the first couple words of the speech that we eventually see, but the cut is so damn precise right there to deny us that. We're going to get it eventually, but not yet. It's blue balling us so beautifully right there.
It happens again, and this is more diegetic maybe because OJ is knocked out and then we see him when he wakes back up. There are several instances of this throughout that film where he does this very quick cut on something where you're anticipating the movement within that particular scene, but then he suspends it and says, okay, I'm going to show you this next thing. The title is it seemed so weird to me. Like, I got it. It was a good joke. It's like when the trailers came out and everything, and the way, the marketing for this, that first trailer where it just comes from the sky and it says from Jordan Peele, nope, right? But I started thinking about it, and not only how ingrained that reaction is, or where that reaction comes from culturally, and in particular Black culture in reaction to media. And you think about the way people use that term is when they see something that they're resistant to, and their kind of gut reaction is, nope, I'm not dealing with it. It is a turn away from action. It is a diversion to say, I will not, right? And so
just don't look.
Just don't look. Right. And here, the way he's using that, and he does have people say it literally several different times, and each time it happens, it's better than the last. He's also doing it within the film too. He's doing this act of obfuscation where he's resisting traditional storytelling, even though he's doing a traditional story. And I love that particular tension too. The film, I think the
Gordy subplot, the Gordy's flashback feels like a structural, every time it pops in, it feels like a structural monkey wrench, pun intended, into the works of a more smoothly functioning sort of blockbuster.
Yeah, and I think a lot of people have been critical of that too, and particularly where it does appear within the film. For me, I think it's incredibly thrilling that he suspends the narrative proper to take it to something that seems tangentially related. It is not tangentially related. It is completely, I mean, if anything, it's setting up just personal and cultural history of where these people are in this particular moment. It is an act of saying yes instead of no, to where I can reveal these things to you because I want you to understand what's important about what they're doing right now. and the way this man has turned into, and he's not a villain. You would think he's going to become a villain, Stephen Yeun,
Mm.
but he's very sympathetic because you actually see the trauma inflicted upon him from this. He's sort of a bystander in it, but he becomes an active participant through the fist, the fist bump. Oh my God, I just sounded 75 years old. I couldn't think of fist bump. The fist bump with the chimpanzee, which is like an act of you're, complicit in my action here. And then he kind of carries that through to its logical extension while also being a
Yeah, I mean, I think
survivor of that trauma.
I think Jupe's not a villain. He makes some really bad judgment calls. I think his desire to reignite his fame. I mean, there's something there too about a formerly famous person who has fallen out of fame, desperately both strip mining their legacy for profit, but also hungry to get back where they were. And this alien creature may be the way that Jupes, and so his hunger for that kind of outweighs his good sense and his sense of danger for himself, for his spectators, for his own family, and it ends up getting everybody killed. But I don't think of him as a villain. He's sort of like he's the instructive tragedy that we're pointing to. I mean,
yeah.
Part of what I like about that, especially that second longer journey through the Gordy's home set, is that it's so long. It's a very long sequence, and it's almost has like a horror movie agonizing quality to it, because like some of the people on the set aren't dead yet, and Gordy keeps beating the living crap out of them.
Oh, it's absolutely horrific. It is.
Yeah,
so
and we're just sort of trapped there. And the genius of it is, I think it's just long enough for us to forget about the A plot, forget about where the hell were we with the UFO game?
Yeah, and exactly.
I got sucked into which again is making its own point, right? I got so sucked into the horror of watching a bloody CGI chimp beat the crap out of people from Jupe's perspective, mostly. Let's be honest, that's another thing there. It's all Jupe himself can't close his eyes to this.
And people are hardly ever critical of, most folks are hardly ever critical of Quentin Tarantino's digressions. And I bring that up specifically because I think the one film spiritually, most recent film this reminds me of is Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And not just because of its surfaces and sort of surface level comparisons with characters who kind of pass their prime on the outside of Hollywood trying to get back in. I think within that, Tarantino's also after the fantasy machine, the thing that can lie and tell the truth to you, and trying to negotiate between the two. Also, structurally, of course, there are chapters to this.
I feel like
to Tarantino,
and he is the master of sort of like lively digression and long extended sequences that don't necessarily seem to go anywhere initially. But the other thing, I mean, that's if you've seen any sort of art cinema at all, you know that's not unusual. Like everybody who thinks that the Gordy subplot was pointless, I kind of want to sit them down and say, let's watch Lost Highway. Like let's watch a movie that has all kinds. Let's watch Twin Peaks: The Return. How many freaking seemingly pointless dangling loose threads were there in that? Like sometimes digressions
those things with these people. It will be very frustrating.
I mean, there's a larger conversation going on that I think Nope has fed into about cultural literacy and the way that like how viewers interact with popular entertainment now. I mean, that could be its own podcast. But yeah, like I also want to touch on, before we invest any more time in this, I do want to say that one thing I loved about this film is I do think it's Peele's best looking film to date. And part of that may be that it's shot on film, that he not to disparage his previous cinematographers at all, who do some amazing work. I've always really loved the Funhouse lighting in Us in particular. I think it's particularly great, that greasy blue black light in the Funhouse in the early sequences up. But Hoyt van Hoytma, who is one of who's been Christopher Nolan's go-to DP since the Batman films. He made Ad Astra with James Gray, Her with Spike Jonze. He's one of our great sort of living working cinematographers. I think he makes this, him and Peele together, and him sort of walking. He's talked about how he kind of had to bring Peele into the world of film, of
Right.
away from digital, and that he kind of took to it like an excited kid, that he loved it. And there's
Understandable.
possibilities.
Where they're centered, this
Right.
valley, mountainous valley, is
And then-
gorgeous.
The night sequences are wonderful. Clayton has talked a bit in interviews about how the imagery is like combined visual and infrared into this wonderful, like eerie day for night. But one of the things I loved about it is that it isn't. I had a criticism of Us's photography, is that I often felt like it was too murky, that there were parts that were there was some lack of clarity in some scenes visually. I feel like I couldn't discern the action properly. And this film more than corrects that. Like, part of it almost becomes like a feature, right, rather than a bug. That part of the sort of thrilling terror of those early sightings of the UFO, or creature, I guess I should say, is that Hoytema's and Peele's images are right on the edge of you being able to tell what exactly you're looking at. And there's that wonderful early like beautiful, quiet early sequence when OJ first spots the UFO, where he's looking, you can see Jupe's like Western show in the distance, and those bright baseball diamond like floodlights.
Yeah.
And in retrospect, we know what's going on there now.
Right.
But the way that, like, he just sits there and stares and stares and stares at it, like, what am I
trying to make out? What am I looking at?
And this feels like the photography of this film, for good portions of it, obviously not sort of the crystal clear daylight sequences, but the night photography in the film feels like sort of the visual embodiment of what am I looking at exactly? Because that's the feeling of seeing something inexplicable. I think it's almost like a horror movie vibe. I don't think this is really a horror film, but there is some horror movie vibe right there, when something is hovering at the edge of you being able to discern it as a visual object, or is this just a trick of the light, or is this just a floater in my eyeball? What am I looking at there? There's some beautiful, those night sequences with UFOs sort of beautifully capture that thrilling sensation of not quite being able to tell what your eyes are showing you.
Yeah, and again, it comes back to just sort of the thesis of what film is able to do. The one thing I love about the night sequences, they're blue, because on film, night equals blue. It does not equal like rain, murky Marvel movie gray, where you can't see anything and it's only just obscuring. It's saving the money on CGI. I know that's what's going on. I know that's why every penultimate action sequence in a Marvel film is raining at night. We're not stupid, but in this film,
and that's why John Wick is always in like crazy colors, because they can do that when they have real people.
All right. Well, I think we should probably leave it there. I'm going to keep thinking about Nope.
I feel like we could talk for another hour.
I think we probably could too. Maybe we'll do a commentary for it one day. Who knows? Who knows?
We should do a Lens watch with me or something.
Oh my God, we'll sell tickets. And our 5 listeners are going to come. I love all 5 of you. But please stick around, because we're going to be talking about a film that is explicitly called out. The poster for Buck and the Preacher is in the Haywood home, right next to the window frame. Oh my God, that scene where it's the Western door shot, except it's through their window onto their ranch, and the door and the camera goes through the window, and a tear went down my cheek. Anyway, it's Gerald Early talking about Buck and the Preacher. That's 1972, our next Golden Anniversaries film. It is a Black Western, another Black Western, Sidney Poitier's debut film. Andrew and I might stop by again during our little vacation. I don't know. We'll look at the calendar and see if anything deserves. What did we do? It's been like an hour. Shit. Oh my God. We'll see if anything else deserves an hour. All right. Thanks, Andrew.
I am the Reverend Willis Oakes Rutherford of the High and Low Order of the Holiness Persuasion Church.
Will you get him out of my house? I got my reputation to think of.
Come, Buck.
Good evening. My name's Cliff Freilich. I'm the executive director of Cinema St. Louis, and we are in our 5th edition of Golden Anniversaries. We're dealing with the films of 1972 this year. The film under discussion tonight is Buck and the Preacher, and I am delighted to be joined by Gerald Early. Dr. Early, I'm sure, is familiar to many of you. He is a longtime teacher at Washington University. Let me give you his actual proper credits. He's the Merle Kling Professor of Modern Letters. He is Professor of English and of American and African American Studies at Washington University in St. Louis. He's also the editor of The Common Reader, which is a terrific publication that's been going on for, well, he can clarify. I think it's somewhere on the order of 6 years now.
6 years. 6 years.
Right on target. Absolutely. So it's a terrific publication that you can find online. They also do a print publication annually. I think they're continuing that tradition. Are you still?
Yes.
And it is paid, but you can sneak in and get a little bit of a taste to see whether or not you'd like to subscribe. And it's very much well worth it. So please consider doing that. He is also a fellow of the American Academy of Arts and Sciences. He has a huge number of other credits, but I think that will suffice. I want to make one recommendation before I introduce and turn things over to him to talk about film and Poitier initially. And that is, speaking of The Common Reader, he wrote a very nice piece in The Common Reader shortly after Poitier's death that is a remembrance of him from the point of view, a very personal remembrance, his first experiences as a kid encountering Poitier on the screen. But also offers wonderful context. So please look that up on The Common Reader. You'll find it at commonreader.woostl, WUSTL.edu. And the name of the piece is The Flame in the Arrow, which you can just search for Poitier. All right, I'm going to disappear for a while and then rejoin Gerald afterwards, after he has his say about the film. And then I want to encourage those of you who are watching to offer your own comments and questions through the chat function, and I will relay those. So please, you're part of this conversation. I hope you join later on. All right, Gerald Early.
Thank you. Thank you, Cliff. Good evening, everyone. I'm very happy to be here and to have an opportunity to talk to you a bit about Sidney Poitier and the film Buck and the Preacher. Now, Buck and the Preacher was the first film that Poitier directed. I'll talk a little bit about that in a minute. But it was not the first Western in which he appeared. He appeared in a Western in 1966 called Duel at Diablo. And that film was directed by Ralph Nelson, who also directed Poitier in his Academy Award-winning performance film, Lilies of the Field in 1963. Poitier was not the top billed star of Duel at Diablo. It was Jim Garner, who had been, as many of you know, had played a cowboy gambler in the television series Maverick, which made him famous, and then he transferred over into feature films. Poitier was the second lead in the film. It also starred B.B. Anderson as well as Dennis Weaver. The film featured Poitier as a gambler and also as an army sergeant, an ex-army sergeant. And it takes place sometime after the Civil War, and it involves Native Americans, Apaches, which is really pretty common in many Westerns to talk about Apaches. And Poitier plays a heroic figure in this film, although his character is not as important as Jim Garner's character. He's the main character, and his character is more complex. He's driven by revenge, a common theme in Westerns, because his wife, who was Indian, was murdered, and he wants to have revenge against the person who did this, and so forth. Poitier doesn't come with anywhere near that kind of, his character does not come with anywhere near that kind of baggage in the film. But he is a heroic character, and Poitier played the role because he wanted very much to do a Western, because Blacks so rarely appeared in Westerns, and he wanted to play a heroic character in a Western. And so this film, Duel at Diablo, fit the bill for him in that regard of playing that kind of character. And it was a kind of, in some ways, an improbable sort of character, but nonetheless, it was effective. And certainly for kids such as myself, I was a teenager at the time the film came out. You know, I enjoyed the film and was very entertained by it, and very entertained by Poitier's character. character is not racial in the film. By that, I mean that his character in that film, nothing ever came up about his being Black. That was not an issue in the film. The race element in the film is with Native Americans and whites, and particularly Dee Anderson's character, who is a white woman who is kidnapped by Apache. She has a baby by an Apache warrior and has this difficulty when she gets back among whites to be accepted by whites because she had been kidnapped by the Indians and had a baby by a Native American man. So that's really the conflict in the movie is about whites and Native Americans, and really has nothing to do with Blacks. Portier said at the time he was quite pleased with that. He said he was tired of, as he put it, the more of that. He didn't want to do any more of that crap about race. That was old hat, with him always playing this put upon Black character, this challenged Black character. And he felt that in some ways audiences wanted to see him in roles that weren't necessarily all about his race. The character that he played in that film, it was in the book on which the film is based, called Apache Uprising. And that character was white in the book, and it was made into a Black character for specifically for Portier. Portier made that film at the time when he was really approaching, really at his zenith, as an American star, as a box office attraction. Once he won the Academy Award for Lilies of the Field, he had really propelled himself into being a major star in the United States and a major crossover figure in the United States. His films, of course, appealed to Black people, but they had crossover appeal, and his films also appealed to whites. Now, Portier, for Buck and the Preacher, this is 6 years later, and things have changed a lot for Portier from 1966, Duel at Diablo, to 1972 and Buck and the Preacher. His career has taken a downturn. It kind of reached, you might say, its high point with In the Heat of the Night, 67, and Guess Who's Coming to Dinner. After that, there were some films that were not very good. There were some sequels to In the Heat of the Night, which were just sort of mediocre. There was a film called The Lost Man, in which Portier is trying to play a more militant kind of character because Black Power has now come in, and Black Power has become the dominant political temperament among Black people in the late 1960s. And so he wants to have a film that reflects that and so forth. But these films were generally not very successful for Portier. So he had been thinking about doing this Western. He and Harry Belafonte, who is in the film with Portier, came up with the project of Buck and the Preacher. And Portier very much wanted to do this. Now, in 1972, we have a period in American films called blaxploitation films. The blaxploitation films were very popular with Black urban audiences. I can remember going to see my share of them when I was in college. Films like Shaft, Melvin Van Peebles' Sweet Sweetback's Badass Song, Superfly, Foxy Brown, Coffee, which were films that featured Pam Grier, who was the leading Black woman star of the period. Fred Williamson was a big star this period. He was in films like Black Caesar and Hell Up in Harlem. These were all very popular films with Black audiences. And all of these films dealt with the inner city. They were extremely urban. They dealt with the inner city. They were usually films that were dealing with Black people fighting against, there might have been some Black people who were involved in crime or something like that, but they were fighting against white people who were doing terrible things to Black people and doing terrible things in the ghetto. And most of these films, Black men were prevailing against them and winning, and they were, getting the woman at the end and all this sort of stuff. And they were super studs, and they can beat up guys, and they got women and all this sort of stuff. And they were fantasy movies, of course. They were revenge fantasy movies. So Black audiences went to see them to see the Black people win over white people. And that was extraordinarily appealing to Black audiences at the time to see such films. However, Black exploitation films were not universally liked by Black people. There were Black people complained about them because they said they stereotyped Black people. They made Black people seem as though all they did, all of them lived in the ghetto. They were all involved in crime in some sort of way and this sort of thing. So there were Black people who complained about blaxploitation movies. And so there were some Black films that came out during the blaxploitation era that were in character different than blaxploitation movies typically were. Claudine, which starred Diane Carroll and James Earl Jones, was one of them, which was about a Black garbage worker marries a woman that has several children, and this, very touching drama about this Black family. There was a film by Ossie Davis directed called Black Girl, about an adolescent Black girl growing up and her problems with her family and her surroundings. There was Sounder, which stars Cecily Tyson. And that was a film that was based on a children's book and did very well among Black audiences. It was considered to be really the kind of anti-blaxploitation movie when it came out, about this Black family struggling in the South. And Buck and the Preacher was also among these films because first and foremost, because it was a Western. And that was very rare during there were very few Black Westerns that were made during the blaxploitation period. This was without a question, the most noted one and the best made one of the films that came out during this era that were Westerns. The film was also meant to have a real strong Black consciousness to it. It was a Western that was made from the point of view of Black people. So this is why the point about Sidney Poitier directing the film is very important. He was not originally the director of the film. The director of the film was a man by the name of Joseph Sargent, who was a perfectly competent white director. But after a few days of shooting, Poitier and Belafonte fired him. They fired him because he didn't have their vision of what they wanted with the film. And so at that point, Poitier started to direct the film because they had been having trouble with shooting the film anyway. There was problems with paying people, problems with the extras. There was problems with a bunch of stuff, as probably is typical with most films. And so Poitier wanted to keep the film on schedule, so he started directing. And Belafonte, convinced the producers and the studio that after Poitier had been doing it for a week or so, the rushes look great and everything, and just let, Poitier, everything's going fine. So just let Poitier just keep directing the film. So they were also afraid that Poitier at that point stopped directing the film wouldn't be made, that they wouldn't send in a new director. They would just can the project. So they were able to continue to make the film with Poitier directing. Poitier had never directed a film before. He knew some things about directing, about camera angles and the like, but he was, this was something that was very new to him. But he would go on from this to direct several more films. And some of them would become quite popular with Black audiences. Also during the blaxploitation period, they were comedies. Uptown Saturday Night, Let's Do It Again. There were 3 of them altogether. And 2 of them starred Bill Cosby along with Poitier. And so it was these films that were very, very popular with Black audiences that he made these comedies. And but Buck and the Preacher was also quite popular with Black audiences. When I saw Buck and the Preacher, I saw it when it first came out in 1972, when it was released. I saw it with some relatives. Most people in the theater, when I saw it, were Black. And they had come to see the film because Belafonte and Poitier were in it. And for, that time and that generation and those folks, Belafonte and Poitier was, as good as you were going to get. I mean, they were the major Black, male stars. And so to see them together in a movie was something that attracted a lot of Black people to come see it. And the fact that it was a Western, which was something different. Poitier was, concerned about how the film would be received. Black people received the film very well. When I saw it, the audience at the end, the Black people in the theater at the end, they clapped. I mean, they cheered. They thought this movie was terrific. And they liked the very pointed racial nature of the film. That the film showed white people basically in a bad light, and white people being terrifically racist and violent. And Black people were saying, yeah, that's right. And these Black people trying to make a life for themselves by going west out of the South after the Civil War. This is a true story. You can read about Black people doing this and trying to find their own townships and their own places, going out into the Midwest and out further west. In a book by a Black historian called Nell Painter, her book is called The Exodusters. And that's what these people were called. These Black people were living, they're called Exodusters. And so Poitier was essentially making a Western about these people. And so, you saw these Black people as these kind of pioneers. It's like a Black wagon train. And, these Black people were going out to find a place for themselves in America. So it was like, they were Americans too, just like the white people went on wagon trains and went out west. There were Black people who were doing the same thing. And it's absolutely true. And, how they persevered against incredible bad fortune and things working against them and so forth. The film also presented Native Americans in a very positive light. Native Americans in the film wound up being supporters of the Black people in the film and helping the Black people in the film against the white people. So it was, the people of color together against the white people in the film. And, they wound up triumphant in the end, the people of color. And that aspect of the film was a big hit with Black people. And Black people liked that. I mean, they liked that thing about the people are ultimately triumphing and Black people and Indians being together and in the film. Now, the relationship between Black people and Native Americans goes back a long way and it's quite complex. There were Black people who had joined Native American tribes, part of them in some way, had escaped slavery and had joined Native American tribes and the like. There had been Black people who had been enslaved by Native Americans because Native Americans several Native American tribes had slavery. Several Native American tribes fought with the Confederacy during the war. So the whole relationship was quite complex. When Black people after the war were in the military, for those of you who might know this, after the Civil War, 4 units were created in the military for Black people, the 9th and 10th Cavalry and the 24th and 25th Infantry Regiments. These were all Black units that were permanently created as a result of the Civil War. And those soldiers, those ones of the 24th, some of you may have heard of, they became known as Buffalo Soldiers, went west, and basically they were part of the Indian Wars. And they fought against Native Americans out west. As I said, this is a very complicated story. That's mentioned in this film, that the Native American that Sidney Poitier his character is dealing with, mentions that to Sidney Poitier that, Black people have come out here and they've killed Native Americans, which they did as part of the Indian Wars in the West. And his character in the film, for those of you who saw, will remember that Sidney Poitier's character had been a Black soldier, but as he tells the Native American that he's talking to, that he's not a soldier anymore. So this stuff gets mentioned, and this kind of sort of historical and racial density that's in the film was very appealing to Black people when it came out. It was enormously appealing. But on the whole, the film was not terrifically successful financially. It kind of just barely broke even. But it did well with Black audiences. Black audiences really liked the film. Now, you wouldn't say that this film is a terrifically innovative Western, not in the way that you might talk about Anthony Mann Westerns with James Stewart, or Sergio Leone Westerns with Clint Eastwood, or Sam Peckinpah's Westerns, Ride the High Country or something like that. It's not on that level of being innovative in the way those kind of Westerns were. But it was something that was fresh and different insofar as the racial take that it had, and having these two black people in the film as heroes, Portier and Belafonte. People have criticized the film because they thought that, one, it's a very conventional Western in many ways. The good guys wind up winning. They aren't, particularly complicated characters. You don't get any anti-heroes here or anything like that. The heroes are the heroes, and so forth. And there's a lack of complexity with the characters, and it even has a kind of blaxploitation sort of ending when Portier and Belafonte wind up, killing all the bad white guys that are coming after. That's definitely a page taken out of a blaxploitation movie. That is definitely a revenge fantasy. The bad white guys who have been attacking the black people who have been traveling out west all get killed in the film, which is definitely a blaxploitation ending. Very pleasing to black audiences, but very unrealistic. And Portier and Belafonte's character even rob a bank in the film and so forth. All of this is pretty unrealistic, but it's very satisfying to black audiences who saw the film and enjoyed the film very much. I would say that people who saw the film, black people who saw the film, had a feeling, kind of saw the film in some of the same ways that they saw Pontecorvo's film, which came out around the same time, called Burn, which starred Marlon Brando. I also saw that with mostly black people in the audience, and their response to that film was very similar to their response to Buck and the Preacher. People also criticized the film because they thought Ruby Dee was underutilized, that women in the film generally were given kind of short shrift. And certainly Ruby Dee was kind of underutilized in the film. There's no question about it. The film was very much for Belafonte and Portier. Some also criticized the film because they thought that Portier's performance was restrained. And some people have said it was kind of restrained, they felt, because he had the double duty of also being director, and he had the tension of having to deal with being the director as well as starring in the film. And that's, I've never made a film, never starred in a film, but I assume that doing both of those things together is enough to stress you out. And Portier also oversaw the editing of the film after the principal photography, after the shooting was completed. So he put in very, very long days. It was said that he put in 18-hour days and didn't sleep very much during the making of the film. And, I can certainly believe that is true. So at this point, I hope I've said enough as kind of background introduction about the film a little bit so that we have a little bit of a basis to have a discussion. So,
one of the things that I was really struck by, and you referenced this very prominently in your intro, was the sort of complex relationship between the Native Americans and the blacks in the film. And obviously they have the solidarity on some levels, but
right.
It's not complete, and it's actually pretty complicated issues,
right,
with regard to the Native Americans' attitudes toward the blacks in particular, and their unwillingness initially. We're not going to fight on your behalf.
Right.
And they do eventually.
Right, they do.
But they wait very dramatically during that long gunfight at the conclusion, in which you said they sort of unrealistically managed to wipe out the overwhelming odds of all these people who are attacking them. And they are helped modestly.
Yes, modestly.
By the Native Americans who they sort of give them almost like a thumbs up, saying, "Yeah, we got you." But I really found that aspect of the film quite fascinating, because you don't typically see that kind of nuanced presentation. During this period of American filmmaking, obviously there was sort of a revisionist aspect to all Westerns, and we did see a different sort of presentation of Native Americans, things like Little Big Man and
Right.
other
Yes.
films. But I'm just curious. I again found that a really entrancing part of the film. It's not central to it.
Right.
Maybe it's pretty important. I'm just curious as to whether or not you had any further thoughts that you might want to share on that front.
I just think it was, as I said, important when they were making the film. I think it was very important to Portier and Belafonte that they were going to give a Black person's view of the West. And I think for them, giving a Black person's view of the West meant seeing Native Americans in a different light. And I also think it was important for them, especially at this particular time period in the early 1970s, when still Black power is a thing. And it resonates a lot with Black people, to show this kind of solidarity. I mean, this is kind of like, this is not a kind of third world solidarity here, where we have this hope between these oppressed people. And, you know, remembering the time and everything, I think that's why that aspect of the film works so well with at least minority audiences, that it had this kind of resonance about third world solidarity. And very much, I think audiences like the idea that this was a film, this was a Western being told from a Black person's perspective.
Of course, one aspect of the film doesn't improve on traditional approaches to Native Americans, in the sense that Native Americans aren't playing Native Americans. It's primarily Hispanics, Latinx, and then Belafonte's wife at the time. One thing that, I wanted to talk a little bit about the interaction between Belafonte and Poitier, who obviously were colleagues and friends, and they made the film very much together, and helped enable the project. Can you just talk a little bit about their sort of role in the sort of Black ecosystem at the time? They were a little probably past the height of their powers with regard to stardom, in both cases, although just a little past, not much.
Sure.
They were really obviously names to conjure with.
Sure. They were two big stars, and Belafonte had not appeared in as many movies as Poitier had. Belafonte was always going around claiming that most of the parts that Poitier was offered had been offered to him first, and he turned them down. He always said that. That's highly disputed by Poitier. The parts were offered to Belafonte first. But Belafonte had been in some important films. But then again, on the other hand, Belafonte had a music career. So he wasn't as dependent on, acting as Poitier was, because Poitier didn't have, the side thing of being a singer. And the two men were kind of rivals in a way. They were friends and rivals. They had, in fact, had a falling out, and they hadn't spoken to each other for 2 years before Buck and the Preacher was made. They had a falling out at Martin Luther King's funeral. I can't remember what exactly it was, but they had a falling out. And Poitier, they both got so mad, yeah, I'm never going to talk to him again. And Poitier said later about it, he said, we're two West Indian guys, and we, when we get mad, man, we really stay mad. But Belafonte finally broke the ice and called him up, and, they started joking and laughing. And that's when Belafonte pitched this project, was part of, their coming back together, about, oh yeah, I got this project about a Black Western, called Buck and the Preacher. What do you think? And so that's what got them back together again. But they had known each other and had been friends since back in the 50s. And but they had also been, as I said, they had been rivals, because, Belafonte had been in Carmen Jones. He had been in a nice film noir called Odds Against Tomorrow, which is, if people haven't seen it, they should see it, because it's a good film noir. I think it was directed by Robert Wise, if I'm not mistaken. But I could be mistaken, but I think it was. And, he had been in some, but he had never been consistently in films. During this time when he was in these, few films, Poitier was in a lot more. He was working so much more consistently. And, they were good friends and knew each other, and they were both great admirers of Paul Robeson. And Paul Robeson is this kind of like giant. For them, Paul Robeson was like this giant figure. I mean, Paul Robeson was the dude, Paul Robeson was the guy who was actor. He was the singer. And Robeson was also the guy who spoke up on behalf of Black people and was willing to sacrifice his career to speak up for Black people and their rights. So they felt it was very important to be on Robeson's good side, to have Robeson respect them and things like that. And so they were very good friends with Robeson and talked to Robeson all the time. What's interesting is that Belafonte did feel at times that some of the roles that Poitier took, he should not have taken, that he thought some of the roles were not good roles. And, you know, he's probably right about that some of the roles probably were not good roles. But Poitier, like any actor, is not totally in control of all the stuff that you make. And, you know, sometimes you have to make this thing in order to make this other thing that you really want to make. You got to make this piece of crap over here, make this thing that you really want to make. So he wasn't in complete control of his career in that regard of just being able to say, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that. I could just totally pick projects. So it was their friendship was legendary. I would hope that someday somebody would write a book just about their friendship, because their friendship was important. And they, as you said, they were on the other, you know, they weren't at their peak anymore, but they were still names.
It's interesting that it was Belafonte who the project originated with, because you referenced the fact that Poitier's character in this film is a little bland. He doesn't have the kind of colorful nature that the preacher does.
Right.
And if I were the director, I think I might have been tempted to cast myself in that role. And it would have also been a sort of turning things a little bit on their head from what we would have expected from Poitier, give him an opportunity to actually play a type that we've not really seen him in. And it would have been fascinating if we had seen a reversal of those two. But knowing that Belafonte actually brought the project to him, he no doubt had that in mind.
Probably so. I mean, probably, you know, he said, oh yeah, you're going to be Buck. Yeah, any actor, you know, the two roles, sure, any actor would have to be a preacher than Buck.
Oh, you didn't have to wear those terrible teeth. I don't know how they managed to discolor those, but I'm sure that mustn't have been pleasant. That character does have a little bit of complexity. You referenced in your intro that it's not exactly, again, sort of a lack of nuance on some levels to these characters, but the preacher certainly has some of that. He ends up reverting to your sort of straight ahead heroic character. You know, he's tempted, but he doesn't actually take the bait. You know, he's going to turn in Buck for the reward and things of that nature, of course, which he would have never received.
Right.
That was also made clear, and perhaps he realized that on some levels. But nonetheless, we see a glimmer, I think, of the complexity that we could have potentially seen more fully realized in that particular character.
I would agree with that, you know, that character had potential to be a really complex character. I mean, that character had potential to be like a Long John Silver character in Treasure Island, that, you know, you had this character that really, you know, you want to hate, but then he'll do something that, you know, you say, oh, well, you know, and you admire and hate the person at the same time. But in this case, he winds up, as you say, completely converting and just being, you know, by the time they're having to shoot at the end, he's just your grade A Western hero. You know? And so, you know, it's too bad. But I do think in the beginning of the film, for the first part of the film, his character did show some complexity and had some real possibility to be a more nuanced character than the character in the end turned out to be.
You also referenced the fact that Ruby Dee's character is given short shrift. In fact, she's introduced sort of early on, and then she just disappears for a long stretch of the film until they finally loop back to her, and then she's sort of pulled back into the plot almost in a peripheral way. I mean, she's there, but not really taking any sort of real active role beyond just sort of like accompanying.
Right.
And yet, I think it is you could see at least some small progress in the sense that Poitier was oftentimes criticized. Well, I don't know if he was criticized, but the films were criticized for the fact that he's never given an opportunity to be a romantic lead.
Right.
He doesn't have a relationship typically in most of these films. At least here we do see, again, not very well developed,
Right.
but we do see a relationship that seems to be very important and is a little bit more developed than what we've seen in his past.
This is true that, Ruby Dee does provide that dimension. It's very interesting that she played his wife as well in Raisin in the Sun. And she also played his wife in Edge of the City. So she's gotten pretty used to play Sidney Poitier's wife in movies. But on the whole, women in the film were kind of given short shrift. And I'm certain that if it were remade today or something, women would be given a much more prominent role in the movie than, Ruby Dee was basically the kind of long-suffering wife, and she deserved better than that. The one scene she had was very effective, but she deserved better than that. I mean, she's such a good actress, and she should have a bigger role.
I'm curious. I know you're a massive jazz fan and expert, and the score for this film was done by Benny Carter. And I'm just curious what your reaction was to the score, because I had a little bit of an issue at times with it.
I don't know. They're trying to get a kind of authenticity of some sort with the music here. And I felt it was a little limiting. Brownie McGee and Sonny Terry were listed as performers, but they never sang anything. And that was kind of disappointing too. If they were going to do that, they really wanted to have some kind of Black folk music that kind of evoked the period or something. I thought they might have had them singing or something in it. I mean, they could have, I think given the film a little bit more texture. I was surprised with Benny Carter doing the score, that the score wasn't richer in some way, that the score wasn't, there wasn't more with the score than what you got.
I wanted to talk a little. You again referenced the fact that this film was part of. It wasn't part of. It was running in parallel with the blaxploitation films, which arguably started like the year before, maybe 2 years before that. We featured Shaft last year. Previous year, we featured Watermelon Man. There were any number of precursors that sort of led the way to blaxploitation. And then, of course, Sweetback's this last year as well. This was a far more traditional approach. But you referenced the fact that a lot of Black people also had, they very well embraced, they had issues with the portrayal of Black men in particular, well, women too, in the films. I'm curious because it seems to me there's a little bit of a through line in the sense that in your article in the Common Reader, you referenced the fact that Porgy and Bess, which Belafonte turned down, Poitier was sort of pressed into service into doing. Was also criticized for many of the same sort of stereotypes being used, etc. It's certainly kind of a blaxploitation film, but by the same token, the same kind of criticisms applied there. I was just curious as whether or not that occurred to you when you were doing your piece, as to that the more things change, the more things stay the same.
Well, yeah, in some ways that's really true. I think Black people are very sensitive about stereotypes of themselves, and it's complicated because they've been stereotyped in some different ways, and also because in some ways they've been stereotyped and they have in some ways embraced some of the stereotypes or tried to turn the stereotypes on their heads or something like that. Black people are highly stigmatized people. And I think any stigmatized group of people, they're very sensitive about stereotypes. So that's why I think the complaint about stereotypes has been very consistent with Black people for just decades and decades and decades. I mean, you'll find Black people who will complain about rap music because they feel as though rap music stereotypes them and things like that. So, Black people are just very, very sensitive about these things. And they're not wrong about, the stereotypes being there. Whether they are always explicitly stereotypes or whether people are trying to do something else with them is another question. But I do think that people do get concerned about that. And it did happen with the Blaxploitation era. Of course, with Porgy and Bess, it was a stereotype about, poor Black people and the language that was used in Porgy and Bess, this and that. And then, of course, it did help the fact that Porgy and Bess was, the novel was written by a white, the opera was written by two. So that did help that, I mean, it might have gone down better with people if Duke Ellington had written it or something like that. But, the Gershwin brothers wrote it and Du Bois Hayward wrote the novel and everything. And so, that made people nervous. But, these Blaxploitation films also had, problem. Many of them were not made by, were not directed by Black people. They were directed by whites. And, they did, and, aspects of Black life, Black urban life, Black ghetto life, whatever you want to call it, in the films, for some people just seemed like stereotypes. And it seemed as though the films weren't nuanced and the films weren't looking at Black people's lives in a way that was really serious. But on the other hand, that's what made the films kind of appealing, because there was a kind of realism in the films, but the films were really fantasy films. They were really, the ending that you got with Buck and the Preacher, you got with a lot of Blaxploitation films where, the bad Black guy shoots all these bad white people, and, and all this sort of stuff. And so they were fantasy. I guess it was cathartic for Black audiences to have that. And so you can't, and so you can't dismiss that, the cathartic nature of it and how important it was for that audience, how hungry the audience was to see Black people on the screen doing something that they could cheer. Black audience, I remember it very well, having lived through that era and seen many of these films when they first came out, how hungry Black audiences were for it. I mean, they cheered. I mean, people cheered at the end of these movies. I mean, they just, yeah, right off. Just, I mean, people were, they thoroughly enjoyed the films.
We have a question. Ian, was Buck inspirational in any way to the recent spate of modern Black Westerns, such as Posse, and most recently, The Harder They Fall? I don't know if you've seen The Harder They Fall on Netflix.
No, I haven't seen that. I've seen Posse. And yeah, I would say so. I would say definitely. But, there were other, I think, influences as well. I think with Posse, as I recall, I think that was, to me, that seemed like partly a tribute to the actor Woody Strode. And Woody Strode was also in a very important Western, a star in a very important Western called Sergeant Rutledge, which I think was directed by John Ford, if I'm not mistaken.
That's correct, yeah.
And thank you. And Woody Strode was a kind of a very important Black movie star. He wasn't as big as Sidney Poitier or Belafonte, but he was certainly an important Black star during his time. And so I think that was partly a tribute to Woody Strode as well, who's featured in that film. But yeah, Buck and the Preacher was definitely inspired that. I would even say that the remake of The Magnificent Seven with Denzel Washington was probably also kind of inspired by Buck and the Preacher a little bit too. Yeah.
All right, I'd like to, we're nearing the finish line here, and I wanted to end a little bit by talking, having you talk about Poitier's importance as a iconic actor, and particularly as a Black actor who throws a really major shadow over film history. I wanted to make a recommendation, by the way. There's a terrific piece by Wesley Morris in the New York Times that was published at the time of Poitier's death, called Sidney Poitier Was the Star We Desperately Needed Him to Be, that I would encourage people to read. But I'd just like to hear your thoughts about, I know in your personal life, he was very important, but talk a little bit about why we need to pay some serious attention to his impact.
Well, Poitier came along at a time when Hollywood was slowly beginning to have tried to give Black people some serious dramatic roles. And, Poitier came along and he was able to play these roles. He had a kind of versatility, but the important thing about him was that he had a great ability to be a crossover actor. That is to say that I think for any Black actor to succeed at the time that he was coming along with his career, you had to be an actor who had some kind of an appeal to whites. It couldn't just be that you appealed to Black people. You had to have some kind of an appeal to whites. And I think Poitier's character, his personality, his mannerisms, all of that, I think had a certain kind of appeal, crossover appeal to whites. He was the first Black actor to consistently get dramatic roles. He was the first Black actor to really become a box office presence. He was the first Black actor to really, I think, be considered a peer in Hollywood at a certain point in his career. And all of those things were very path-breaking. And he also introduced certain kind of subject matter in films, showing Black people in a way that they hadn't been shown before. What was important about his characters was that in most instances, he was trying to show Black people as fully human, as having dignity, as having pride. And those things were extremely important to Black people. Even if they didn't always like the film, it was important the kind of character that he was playing and the presence that he had on the screen. So there's no way you could overestimate his importance, I think, in American cinema.
And last, why don't you give what you think are the essential roles, the films that people should absolutely seek out if they want to get a clear sense of who Poitier was as an actor? And for that matter, if you want to recommend any of the films that he directed, his directorial career, in my estimation, is not anywhere near the level of his acting.
Well, this is true. I would agree that, with that. The Blackboard Jungle is a film that I think that if you've not seen it, you should see it. I think the character he plays in there, Miller, he just does a terrific job. I mean, he's just charismatic in that film. I think he and Glenn Ford really carry that film. So I would certainly recommend that film. I would recommend In the Heat of the Night, where he plays this Black Philadelphia cop in Mississippi with this kind of attitude. I think that was a film where he played I think it was a very memorable performance in that film. A Raisin in the Sun, which is, of course, the most famous play written by a Black person, Lorraine Hansberry. I think that was a very important performance, and a very important performance with him in an all-Black movie. And he didn't make a lot of those, but that was clearly the most important all-Black movie that he was to make. Those are three I can think of right off the top of my head that I think are really, really important performances that he gave that people should see. Lilies of the Field is a film that I also recommend because there is no other film where he is as winning a personality, as glowingly charismatic, pleasing. There's no white person on earth who wouldn't love him after seeing him in Lilies of the Field. I mean, it's just a marvelous performance in that regard. He's just so incredibly likable in that film. So,
It's quite funny.
Yeah.
During that film as well. Obviously, he does actually have sort of a subspecialty comedy later in his career as a director.
Yes, he did.
But comedy is not what you associate Poitier with.
No, it's not what you associate Poitier with. And, Buck and the Preachers, it's a perfect example of that because he basically was the straight man to Harry Belafonte.
All right. Well, great. Again, thank you so much, Gerald, as always. Very much appreciate your time and the insight that you've given us. We'll make certain to lure you back for a future Golden Anniversaries presentation. You can be certain we'll be knocking on your door.
Sure. Thank you so much for having me.
All right. Thanks a lot.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.